nothing trumps customer service. Nothing trumps a good customer experience. It's the thing that matters most to our consumers. It's what they expect. You don't need to, I hear a lot of times where they say, well, we don't want to be the next Rollins or we don't want to be the next Terminex. And I would always laugh and say, why wouldn't you want to be that? It's kind of silly. But look at the things that those companies do well. It's not a mistake that they're the size that they are.
With brand new president of Anticimex North America, Brian Alexson. Brian, welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Patrick, it's exciting because I've worked with Anticimex now for a long time, and Brian, what you guys have done since 2016 in North America it's been phenomenal growth. And today we're going to talk a little bit about a profile of a leader. I want to go into your background. But before we do that, give us an update on what's going on with Anticimex North America in general.
Sure. Well, we're continuing to grow, and the platforms that we have integrated into our system since 2016 continue to operate very well. We're growing double-digit organic growth. We continue to have a very strong M&A strategy throughout, as you know, and have recently moved into some new markets and market expansion. We're now on the West Coast. We're in Arizona, and we're in Colorado. And we've got future markets that we're looking to get into. So it's an exciting time.
It is. Do you envision, from a high-level strategy perspective, do you effectively at some point envision Anticimex in North America to look like a Rollins or a Terminex from a footprint perspective, literally coast to coast, the center of the country?
It's a great question. I don't think there are some markets that Orkins and Terminex and some others are in that probably don't fit our strategy. However, the Midwest is certainly somewhere where we want to be, the Texas market, and some of the markets throughout the Northeast that we're not currently in, as upstate New York as well. So we've got enough to handle there without having to worry to be everywhere. We also have the Pacific Northwest as well as our West Coast strategy. So there's plenty for us in the east, central, and western portion of the country to fulfill our strategy and our goal by 2025 that I don't think we need to be everywhere and be all things to all people.
I think by now most folks in the industry know who Anticimex is. It's a Nordic business, has been around almost 100 years now, right? Since the 1930s.
Right.
I think it's, last I checked, probably the largest pest control service provider in Australia, presence in Southeast Asia, and of course across the European continent. North America is kind of a frontier market still for you guys, relatively new in the whole scheme of things. But North America, I guess, for Anticimex is a little bit different than a lot of the other areas of the world. Australia, of course, is residential heavy, or domestic as they call it there. Right. In North America, I know that the smart technology is an important avenue for growth for you folks, but are you pretty agnostic as to your development and growth in residential versus commercial in the United States, or do you have a kind of a strategic preference for one over the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the way the markets are set up here, that getting into the residential market is kind of a no-brainer, and particularly with as aggressive an M&A strategies we have, the vast majority of what comes to the table is very residentially driven, and it makes sense. And that's also our market here in the U.S. It really drives the residential piece. However, the commercial market is a strategic part of our plan, and when we look at what we're doing internally in our organic growth and building our sales teams and our sales management team and building a professional sales organization and more sales management expertise as we go forward into these new markets, and our market expansion, commercial is going to play an integral part of that.
Yeah, that's great. Brian, I first off, I wanted to congratulate you on your promotion to president. I think it's a fantastic move by Anticimex putting you in charge.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
In your short stint thus far, I think you've made a great impression on the industry in general. So again, congratulations.
Thank you.
I guess before we really start delving deep into pest control today, let's talk a little bit about your background.
Sure.
How'd you get into this industry? Where have you been, and how'd you end up here?
Yeah, it's an interesting ride. Not many people that I've worked with over my 30-year plus career in the pest control industry, went to school and said, I'm going into the pest.
It's never happened.
Right? Not many. There's a handful, but not many. And I'm no different than that. I was actually considering pre-law at the time when I was in school, and started a janitorial business while I was in school, so I could go to school days and work nights, and it worked out really well. Was making a bunch of money, and said law school's just not for me, and I was doing very well. And like most people in my mid-20s, wanted to settle down, start a family, and move forward. And working nights wasn't conducive to that, so we decided to sell the janitorial business. And it was right about the time where ServiceMaster was, and Terminex in particular, had purchased Waste Management's pest control division, and True Green had become part of the portfolio, and so on. And I joined them after I had sold the business. And they asked me to stay on for a period of time, and I ended up joining and running the Northeast region for the company for many years. Moved down, was part of opening up our commercial division at Terminex, and I was with the company, moved on to True Green from there for 4.5 years, but was with the company for about 17 years prior to moving on to my next stage of my career.
Yeah. And then you basically were with Anticimex, I guess, for how long before you became president?
2 years.
2 years.
Exactly 2 years.
Okay. Okay.
Well, there's a turnaround, and you've been in other allied industries, right? Solar, waste management. There's some other things before
Recycling,
you recycling.
So a lot of route-based kind of recurring revenue.
Very similar. Service-based businesses, route-based businesses, very similar. There's the solar business and the renewable energy piece is a little bit of a diversion from that to some degree, but it's still the customer experience that matters. And, you're dealing, and the solar industry in the U.S. is very residentially driven at this point. So it fit my background, and I became an attractive target to that industry because of my residential background, it being in the pest control business.
Yep. On that, the renewable energy, I tend to think pest control is a lag. It lags in technology, which we'll talk about, but in recycling, in solar, I mean, what does pest control have to learn from other allied industries? Yeah,
it's innovation and being willing to look at innovation. You're right. The pest control industry, over my 30 years has been slow to change. And, we're still using snap traps, invented in the 1800s. So, they work, and everything is only as good as the operator and the professional that's using them. And that's no different in any other industry, but they're constantly looking at innovation and ways to change those industries and make a better customer experience. And we can learn a lot from that.
Is it going to take almost changes in law, forced innovation, like you look at California and other countries, I think Canada, where it's like, hey, we're banning second generation anticoagulants, right? And y'all already have a head start with the smart technology. What other ways can you imagine pest control would innovate if it's not forced?
Yeah, I think rather than it be regulated, because I'd hate to see our industry, be regulated to change like any other industry. I'd hate to see that. But somebody's got to lead, right? Somebody's got to take the ball and run with it, so everybody else, looks at it and says, yes, this works. And it only takes one to show that it works. But the innovation of, digital pest control products and some of the other things that are out there that are going to change the way we do business. And more importantly, it's going to change the customer experience, because that's ultimately what's going to move the needle. When you look at innovation, you look at technology and so on, it's going to be driven by customers and customer experience. And those that get out front are going to lead the way, but the rest will follow.
Interviews, I'm thinking about Jim McHale, super stoked about smart technology. Your interview with Jarl, that smart technology, it was being adopted, but slowly but surely, and 10% sticking in my head. Is there some tipping point at which Anticimex has really pushed out smart technology on a broad basis to where other companies, like a $3-4 million company can really follow and say, hey, it's working?
Yeah, when I first came on board with Anticimex, my role reporting to Scott Stevenson was to drive smart and to roll it out to all of our platforms and to all of our branch locations, and spent the first year with the company doing that. And we saw exponential growth with it. And it goes back to our B2B drive as well. We've got residential geared towards residential products that'll be rolled out here very shortly. But it's really been on the B2B side of things where we've seen the biggest or the most traction, if you will, on the smart technology side. So it's also opened up verticals to us that have been very different than we've seen with some of the platforms that we've brought on board. And you look at their commercial base, if you will, it's largely retail driven, multi-unit housing, which is a lot of what you see in a lot of companies. This opens up verticals that, when you talk about pharmaceutical and biotech and the areas that can't have these type of problems within them, that are used to dealing with one or two people within the industry, now they have an option from a digital standpoint and from a technological standpoint that's very different than what they've ever seen from the pest control industry. And we've seen a lot of traction with it. So it's been very exciting from that standpoint.
Outside of smart, and I'm thinking rodent work, what other innovations coming through with Anticimex?
So the smart technology is not just rodent work as well, that we have a smart sense product that will identify early detection and monitoring for pest problems, cockroaches and ants and other things. We're working on a whole host of other things relative to termite control and other things from a digital standpoint. Our innovation center in the Denmark area is constantly working to design new products. And we have a meeting every year where they ask us, what is it that you want? And they stopped asking me because all I keep repeating is bed bugs every time they ask what I want. So they know what I'm looking for. So those are the type of things that we're constantly working on. But it goes a little bit beyond just rodent control. So.
With regard to smart, I know it's clearly been a push from Stockholm. Everyone's excited about smart. I get the sense, on my last trip over to Stockholm, when we sat down with Jarl, I asked him how you're marketing the smart technology in Europe. And, he said the focus is really to make sure that the end user understand it. So, for example, the customers of the potato chip manufacturer want that, and therefore the client of Anticimex comes to Anticimex. Are we starting to see that at all yet in the United States, or is it more of a top? I guess, do a lot of the end users even understand this stuff exists?
Not really. Yeah. And that's a great point, that we're still more handling it from a direct sales standpoint, of getting out in front of people and explaining to them that we've got a little bit of a different tool in our tool belt than we had previously. We did a great job for you in the past with all the tools we had available to us, but now we have a different tool. And explaining that to them and what the differentiation is and the data that it produces. And, when you look at the average rodent station, and if you're servicing a facility, how many minutes a year you really know what's going on in that rodent station, where we know, 525,000 plus minutes a year, what's happening in that station and in that trap. So they get that, they see that, and when it starts to convert to the residential piece, they'll see the same thing, where it's like having a Modern or a Viking or an American Pest technician underneath their kitchen sink 365 days a year.
Yep.
So
we're here in Rollins' backyard in Atlanta. As you look to the left and the right, and Rollins, Terminix, the Rentokils, Certus trailing a little bit behind, you've got Arrow here. Who's challenging you to be first to market when it comes to innovation and technology?
My boss, first and foremost. So Jarl is certainly, the driver of that within our organization, as you guys know. But looking at the industry itself, it's not about Rollins or Terminix. And I've spent many years with Terminix, and, there was a lot of conversation about innovation while I was there and worked with some phenomenal people. But the industry's slow to change, and it's really been driven by manufacturers that have really driven the innovation as opposed to the pest control companies. And that needs to change a little bit, I think. There's no doubt in my mind that the Rollins and the Terminixes and the Arrows and the companies that you named off are going to be at the forefront of the technological move that this industry is going to take. And it won't just be Anticimex, but we'll be there as well. So.
I guess switching gears a little bit, now that you're, I know you're still fresh into this new position, but when I think about Anticimex as an organization, particularly in North America, one of your brand markers, so to speak, is being a decentralized organization.
Right.
And, Jarl and I had this discussion, and I want to have the same discussion with you. There are clearly trade-offs in a decentralized organization versus a centralized organization. You look at a Rollins or a Terminix, very centralized. How difficult, or what sort of challenges do you think are on the horizon for you, because you're going to be probably doubling this organization in the next couple of years. There's going to be, I guess, pressure on both sides to decentralize as well as to centralize. You need to have centralized functions. So how do you look at that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that we talk about all the time. All of the platform presidents and I were together last week talking about this very subject, about what's the future look like for us? What do we look like when we grow up, so to speak? And there's centralized or opportunities to centralize that are kind of no-brainers on the finance side of things and the billing side of things, things that we just don't need to be doing at the local level that really don't touch the customer. The customer doesn't care where their bill is mailed from at this point in time or where it comes from. They care about the technician that shows up at their house and the service that's provided and the experience they get when they call. And that's really the entrepreneurial spirit at our platforms and that decentralized model of delivering an outstanding customer experience every time is the differentiator for us. The marketing piece and the branding and how many brands we will have, when we fulfill our 5-year plan at the end of 2025, we're going to have to look at that as how can we centralize our marketing a little bit better without losing the local flair that goes along with it, because we don't want to lose that local touch. There's things that we do at a local level that we couldn't replicate on a centralized national level, but there's things that we don't do well on a centralized level right now that we need to get better at. So it's a fine line and a balance that we're walking. I've been in a centralized model in our industry, in a very top-down model, and I get it. I get where the opportunities are there, but I also see where the decentralized model has its strength and outweighs the centralized model. And the key is going to be walking that fine line and not losing that entrepreneurial spirit, because I heard somebody say a long time ago in our industry that when you're building your org structure, the further you get away from the customer, the least important they are. And I'm the least important guy in our organization. Yeah. So I'm the furthest away from the customer in North America. So the person who's in front of them or answering the phone every day are the most important. So making sure we don't lose that decentralized local approach, because that's what made these platforms attractive to us to want to bring them on board in the first place. So to deviate from that would be silly at the end of the day.
I think I could probably make the argument that, and I actually have made this argument, that your job is, out of all of the positions in Anticimex, yours is probably the most challenging, probably more so than Jarl's, because when I look at the organization, every platform in the United States would be equivalent of a country somewhere else, right? Exactly. Yep. And so you are now straddling multiple countries versus, my colleagues in Switzerland, they're worried about Switzerland, right? Spain's worried about Spain. So you effectively now have, 8, 9, 10 countries, right? And so, you're kind of you're a square peg in a round hole in the Anticimex system, because, Jarl talks about how, what is he, the protector, the branch manager? What was his quote, right? And so it's Jarl to the branch, and the branch is effectively a business, a standalone business, but you're kind of that guy in between. So how do you fit between the CEO of the organization and then the platform president?
Good question. So Jarl, I look at myself as an extension of Jarl, nothing more than that. That just here to execute and operate and deliver on that message that the branch manager is the hero in our organization. They're the guy that is managing the people that are touching the customer every day. And, every meeting I've ever had, the first thing that's on my list of things to focus on that's important is the customer experience. It's got to be outstanding. So, unless when everybody is delivering the minimum expectation of a customer when they sign up with a pest control company is we're going to take care of their pests. Doesn't matter what the brand is, that's what they expect. So when you're delivering that, and everybody delivers it fairly well that's out there. So when that's the case, your only true point of separation is the customer experience. That happens at the branch level. It doesn't happen in my office. So it's making sure that feeling that the branch manager is the hero in the organization permeates throughout the rest of North America, that it's not just Jarl speaking that's coming from me as well. So I just look at myself as an extension of him and the message here in the US, and helping each of our platforms from a support standpoint, making sure we've got the right pieces in place on our North American team at what we call Inc. is basically in place and the right people to support the platforms to do what they do best. So I don't see it as any different. It's just managing it on a bigger scale than some places. But that comes with doing business in the U.S., right? When you consider the pest control market worldwide, we're 50+% of it. So I guess it has to be structured that way. So.
In your history before, in the turnaround, and you got a turnaround, and you got it done sooner than expected. I think that was in Texas, if I remember right.
Yeah, a year and a half sooner than we wanted to do.
Sometimes I can think a turnaround is easier because there's a lot of red flags, right? Like, hey, look at me, fix me. I think of Anticimex as a very high performance, high quality business, great people, as we all know. What does it look like to identify areas that can be improved in a high performing culture like that?
Yeah, it's not dissimilar than a turnaround. When you look at each local area, there's always areas for improvement, right? None of our operations are running perfectly. They all run very, very well, but there's always an area. And then there's the environmental things that jump in there, right? We just went through a pandemic that impacts that. So, we had to change the way we did business last year, and we had to change quickly on the fly. And our teams adapted real quickly, real well. And we had a great year as a result of it. But now things are starting to trend back towards what we knew before the pandemic, and now we need to shift accordingly and so on. And my goal has always been, look 5 miles down the road for the next turn. Let's not be reactionary in the business. Let's be proactive, and let's try to figure out what is it that you'll hear from me often. What do we want to be when we grow up? What's our 5-year plan? What's that look like? And what are we doing today to make sure that we get there? That if we're just reacting to what's going on in the environment, it's already too late. So we have to be at least 5 miles down the road. So there's always that shift in any business, any industry, any organization, that you see that initial spike where it's up, and then it tends to taper off and plateau and sometimes go backwards. That, my goal is always see that curve coming before it does and make sure that we're adjusting so that we're on the next curve and the next one from there. So, our business being operating as well in some of our platforms, we've got some platforms that aren't operating as well as others. We got some branches that need improvement, whether it be from, are we spending enough marketing dollars in those areas, in those markets to make that branch manager successful? Do we have the right sales management, sales staffing there? Do we have enough service professionals to service our customers properly, to make sure that we're not burning them out, but we're doing the right thing and we're responding in a very fast manner to our customers when they need us? So making sure that all of those things are being looked at down the road, when, from experience, I guess, for lack of a reason, I've been through this before. I've made all of the mistakes that these guys could, and help them not have to make them. Yeah. So that's really the approach to it.
And I think when you roll out new concepts, there's a lot of energy and excitement that just naturally comes with change. People are willing to flex and adapt. How do you teach the presidents to keep things going 3, 6, 12 months down the road and sustain a high level of performance?
Yeah, it's always a challenge, right? Because our branch managers are focused on the day and the season, and we are so seasonal here in different parts of the country, where in other parts we're not. So everybody's got a different view of their business and when to react and how to react and so on. Days like we had last week, where the platform presidents and I, for 2 days, were locked in a hotel room in San Diego, and we were basically planning out what does the second half of this year look like and what's the first half of next year look like, and talking through that strategically of when are we going to start doing the things that we're doing. We're going to start our budgeting process for next year within the next 30 days. So we're really looking further ahead and having those conversations. And just those conversations, as I said, our platform presidents have an amazing entrepreneurial spirit, that they're also very competitive. They're not just looking at the market and their own budgets. They want to be the best platform we've got. They want to be the best country that we've got. So they're looking at all of those reports and figuring out how are they going to get there. So tapping into what makes them great is kind of the easy part. It's just making sure that I know what it is that makes them great and what makes them tick and what motivates them. And typically it's competitive spirit. They want to be the best. So.
And I think Anticimex North America is a very interesting experiment in that the platform presence that you have, at least the ones that have come in through the acquisition of the business, usually on the day of the closing of the transaction, that's the extent of the experience that they have of running a business of scale, right? So I own or I run a $20 million business. That deal closes. I've probably never run a $40 or $50 million business. And, back to your Terminex days or any of the other big companies, they make an acquisition. It gets fit under a regional or maybe a division president, but that guy's got a $300 million P&L anyway, so it gets put right into that pyramid. Whereas in, Anticimex, you've got very, very entrepreneurial, not corporate guys, entrepreneurial guys, but they don't. That's kind of a mixed bag, right? Because some of them just don't have the experience of running a business of scale through no fault of their own. How are you guys, as you grow this business, how is it that you take and develop these sorts of managers? What's your philosophy there? Where are you taking this organization as far as leadership development goes?
Yeah, excellent question. So we talked a lot about this last week when we were all together about people development. And that's, in our industry, our largest expense in any business is, it doesn't matter what company or what brand we're talking about, it's our people. Right? They're the most important piece. So making sure that we put the right development plans in front of them, that we're teaching them how to be able to run a $100 million business while they're running a $20 million business and using that development. A lot of it is based on my experience as well as some of the other folks that have been there and done that in their careers. And we've got some folks that have been there and done that. We've brought on some people that I've worked with in the past life that have now joined us at the platform level as well as on our Inc. team to be able to support and show what it's going to look like, at the end of 2025, what we want to look like that have already been through this trip to some degree. And making sure that we're not just developing at the service level and the sales level and even the branch management level, but beyond that, and making sure that our people are getting developed and ready for their next job before they get it. That's always been the biggest struggle that I witnessed in my 2 years with Anticimex, because we were moving so fast and bringing things on so quickly that it was just next man up type of mentality that, whoever was the next guy available, we moved them in there, and we did them a disservice in some cases doing that. We owe it to them to make sure that we're getting the training and development, and we're building a branch management training program as well as an executive training program that'll be rolled out first of the year in 2022, so that all of our platform presidents those that are candidates to be future platform presidents will be trained before they get the job. The platform presidents will get ongoing training and development, and same thing for our branch managers as well. That the people that we've identified from inside and outside of the company, that we're teaching them how to do this job before we hand them the keys to the building. So.
When we spoke last week, I think the two words you threw out were strategic versus opportunistic.
Yes.
Did I remember that right?
You did.
What does that look like from your level in entering new markets going forward?
So first and foremost, everything is strategic, right? When you're looking at the new markets where we want to be in, let's do the market analysis. What makes sense for our business? What makes sense from an opportunity standpoint? Just because a platform opportunity arises doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit for our culture and what we do. So we don't want to jump into somewhere just because it's an opportunity. We need to make sure we vet it out properly and that we do all the right things with it once we get it. But I'm also much more of an operational background, right? Having been there, done that. I've run big operations. I've run small operations, run branches. So I've been in this industry a long period of time. So I look at opportunities a little bit different when they come than some of the folks within our M&A team, for example, because they're looking at, is it a perfect fit for us today? Where I look at it and say, okay, what do I need to do with this to make it the perfect fit? So that's where the opportunistic piece comes in. Same thing looking at markets, that we were very diligent in our past 4 years about going into a new market and saying it has to be this size business and it has to fit that mold, if you will. Where if you look at what we did on the West Coast, we've kind of changed that a little bit, where we've gone into Colorado with what wouldn't be perceived in the past life of us here in the past 4 years as a platform business based on the size of it, but it fit well for our organization. So we took advantage of the opportunity. We got some great leadership that came along with the business as well as some good people, and we're in a market. So I'd say that was much more of an opportunistic, jump into that market than we would have done in the past. And we'll be doing more of that in the future. But strategic opportunism.
Yeah, you got Kevin Lee Masters with the big deal. So that's a big deal.
That was a big deal. And Kevin's going to do a lot for our organization moving forward. And we're going to provide a lot of opportunity for Kevin because he's got exactly what we're looking for in this organization going forward. And he's going to help us get there.
He's a great person.
Yeah, I guess, when you think about it, you're right. A few years ago, if it wasn't 20 plus million in a particular market, we're going to go ahead and pass. But as you well know, when you talk about opportunities, you've got to be ready on the buy side because
Absolutely.
assets are scarce.
Sure.
And owners wake up one day and say, I'm selling tomorrow.
Right.
So
Usually in December.
yeah, exactly right. That's what.
Right.
So typical pest control owner, definitely. Maybe I qualify to be a platform, with this new opportunistic theory. But I have not done a serious acquisition in the past, right? Hey, I'm exiting the industry. Here's $20,000, or here's an account or two. Well, as you train these presidents coming up, right? Jim now has a few under his belt. Of course, David Billingsley, I know at least 13 when he was at American. Right. Michael Schmidt, tons.
Yep.
Before he moved into American. What does that look like for someone like a Kevin Lee Masters or a Shane Hoy? That's like, hey, deer in the headlights. I don't know what to do. How do you get them trained up?
Yeah, we walk them through the entire process with our Inc. team and our support team. And the platforms that have been there and done that to some degree, you mentioned a couple, is also Turner with Bill Talon and Wayne's with Sean that have done a lot of acquisitions and integrated them into the business through bolt-ons very successfully. So we've got teams built in each of those platforms that are doing this on a full-time basis, and a lot of talent that understands how to integrate PestPac or some other operating system into our operating system. So we tap into that talent as we go, and we hold their hand through it while they're learning. And we did that with Jim at JP McHale, and now they're up and running. And now we're looking to tap into them for some experience to help out in other areas. So it's just about spreading that. But we always have the team at the U.S. level or the North American level team to go in, support, help, and be able to get that done for them if necessary while teaching them.
So everyone wants to know, like, I'm married to my brand. I love my brand. I decide to sell to Anticimex, right? And all of a sudden, what do you decide? Hey, is this going to be a platform? Is it more than just brand name and people? I'm thinking about the East Coast as you're entering new markets or moving into new states and kind of heading a little bit west towards the Mississippi. What does that decision look like?
Yeah, it's a combination of a lot of things. It's number one, timing is obviously part of it. Did we get a, quote, platform established prior to other bolt-on acquisitions? The size of the business certainly plays a role. However, it's the brand equity that's in the market that matters more. But even with bolt-on acquisitions, that sometimes it's foolish day one to roll that even $2 or $3 million brand up into a platform. We may maintain that brand for a while. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, is, again, part of the decentralized model, and having the ability to do that and not just get absorbed by a large name. I mean, nobody knows the Anticimex brand at the consumer level yet. So to go into some of these new markets and throw that out there doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So we maintain the platform brand as much as possible. However, there may be occasions where a bolt-on acquisition may have a stronger brand in the market than the platform level, and we'd take a look at it. That, does it make sense to change the brand? Does it make sense to absorb it? Does it make sense to run the two brands for a period of time and then have a strategy relative to timeline where we're going to absorb it and integrate it in?
Speaking of acquisitions, clearly that's an important avenue for growth for the business. But, at the end of the day, the best sort of growth is organic.
Right.
So, in your role as president, last fall we heard a lot about what Jarl does as the CEO sitting over there and the types of things he looks at. But I mean, what does somebody like you look at to monitor the performance of the business and basically the indicators that you look at to help you make some decisions within the organization?
Yeah. Good question. I think there's certain indicators in the business that are important to me on a day-to-day basis that I tend to focus on, that driving those questions down to the platform presidents and having those conversations every day with them tend to make them important throughout, because what's important to our bosses becomes important to us, right? Yep. Kind of a no-brainer from that standpoint. So, the customer experience is number one, first and foremost to me on all things that we do. If it's not good for the customer, why are we doing it? And why do we continue to do it? And that's not just acquiring customers. That's also looking at the experience year 2, year 3. Every time we have an opportunity to touch the customer, what does that look like? And that couples into the retention piece. that looking at our attrition of customers, that I look at every single one of them. When I look at the customers that we lose, I will look at them and I will make phone calls and ask why. What could we do differently to keep that customer and so on? And, we have some platforms, Turner, for example, Bill Talon and his team have taken it as far as they have a weekly call with all of their managers and all of their lead people in the organization, and they review every single cancellation. So that's how important it's becoming to the organization. That to me is going to drive organic growth. That, selling it's hard enough. Retaining it is the important piece, and making sure that that customer understands we want them for a long period of time. This isn't just a short example of what we want to do for them. Then, from there, sales excellence and the service that we deliver and taking care of the customer's issues, kind of a no-brainer, but sometimes it gets lost in the fray when you're, focusing on what it is that drives the business organically. When you're so focused on M&A and growing so quickly, it can get pushed to the side on the day-to-day basis. It's probably the area that I'm most proud of in our organization over the past 2 years is how as an organization we have improved in our sales sophistication, our sales tracking, the sales metrics that we're using, and the sales professionalism of our sales managers throughout the organization, both on the commercial and the residential side. I think we've improved dramatically, and we're seeing it in most of our platforms. We're seeing double-digit or close to double-digit organic growth on top of the M&A growth that we're getting right now. So that's working out really well. And then it's about people development, right? If we're making our people better tomorrow than they were today, they're going to take care of our customers. They're going to do the right things, and they do. And then
how do you measure that, the people development aspect?
So looking at, what each individual is doing, and are we able to provide improvements in their performance? Are we able to make them aware of things that they weren't aware of? Are we able to teach them how to develop dashboards that matter? Of what they're looking at, and how to make it competitive within the organization, and tap into those competitive juices that all of our employees have that want to be better than everybody else in the organization. And then it's mostly about transparency of showing, here are some of the areas that we talked about that you felt you needed development on. Here are some of the areas that I felt you needed. And now look at where we are today. Look at how you're performing in those areas. Dramatically different. And it's not just about leadership skills. We focus a lot on leadership training and development, but if you don't know how to run the business, being a good leader really isn't going to matter much, right? So you have to have both. It does one without the other really doesn't get the job done. So it's making sure that we're developing their leadership skills, their capabilities of people wanting to follow them, their ability to identify talent and bring the right people in the organization who have that customer-centric mentality that we want everybody to have. And then teach them how to lead those teams as well, not just to manage the business.
I just have this random curious thought. If you're not traveling, you live in Boston, you're here in Atlanta.
Yep.
Outside of that, if you're back home in Boston, what the day in a life looks like now?
It's probably endless hours on the phone talking to everybody and having calls, or whether it be through Zoom calls or Teams or whatever technology we're using, to touch base with each of our platform presidents and each of my direct reports at the Inc. level, and making sure that they've got what they need and that they're doing what they should be doing.
So every day.
Well, you're pretty new on the job, so you've been, from what I understand, really making the circuit, right? You're doing a lot of traveling around, meeting with different folks.
I expect that to be the case for the second half of the year. As my goal is to get to every branch, sit with every branch manager, and find out what's going well there and what do they need from us to get better. So
I know that since you are relatively new in this position, there might not be an answer to you might not have seasoned long enough to be able to answer this question, but what's your biggest surprise or something unexpected once you took over this position? Is there anything yet that's popped up?
Not really. My predecessor, Michael Vignay, and I have worked together for 2 years, and we've spent, and obviously this transition wasn't a surprise to either one of us. So, we had spent the last couple of months traveling together and going everywhere together. And we've worked so closely together that you talk about what was I doing at the end of the day. I can tell you every Friday afternoon was a phone call with Michael and I for a couple of hours about what's gone on this week and what are we doing next week. So we were fairly aligned on most everything. So because of that, there really aren't many surprises as what I've seen so far. I think there's areas where I think I would have probably moved a little faster relative to our M&A activity and COVID and where we stopped things and that type of thing. But looking back at it, how we rallied our troops and having daily calls with our platform presidents when the COVID pandemic, first started and the shutdowns happened. And, I don't think we could have handled it much better. The leadership at the platform level and how they adapted to this was phenomenal. And continuing to do that, I'd say if there is one surprise, it's how we're still a little bit delayed in adjusting, getting everybody back into the office and, what that looks like. But everybody's struggling with it.
Everyone. We've been talking about that all day. Yeah.
So
going into the dual process, the potential IPO or moving into a long-term fund, now coming out, what's different now that there's an answer? Hey, we're in a long-term fund with EQT now. What does it look like moving forward?
Nothing's different.
Okay.
It's more of the same. And, this worked out well and everybody here's what the process looked like. And now let's go. It's just, rallying the troops and getting back in gear and moving forward for the next iteration of what we look like in 3, 4, or 5 years from now. So for me, it's a little bit more of aggressive M&A approach, having Sebastian, who has joined our M&A team as our replacing Mike Schmidt. He and I are on the phone 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day as far as our strategy and where we are and what needs to be done and driving that aggressively forward for what we want to do with new market expansion. I would say that has changed a little bit, but that's more COVID related than it is the exit and the new fund. So,
and what about, in your position? I mean, how are you judged by Jarl as having performed or not performed in your position? I mean, by what standard do you live by?
So Jarl is probably one of the better bosses I've ever worked for, as far as you always know what he expects. And he's an outstanding communicator, but he manages similarly to myself. Is let's communicate what's expected of our people very clearly, and let's get out of their way, and let's get the obstacles out of their way. And where they need us, they need us. But if they don't need us, let's get out of their way and let them do their job and do it well. And that's why they're there. So, from that standpoint, it's fairly easy. It's the development of our people and how are we performing on a month-to-month basis. But it's an overall over-encompassing feeling in the organization of teamwork, camaraderie, competitiveness, and so on, that it's all looked at. It's not just about profitability. It's, the way Jarl looks at it is very similar to myself, that if we're doing all of the right things with the customer experience, if our sales process is working well, if our attrition rates are good and our customer service is good, and our branch managers are getting everything they need, the profitability takes care of itself. And I truly believe that as well.
It strikes me, though, when you think about Anticimex North America, it's a particularly difficult job vis-a-vis more mature businesses because, clearly any deal that a Terminix or an Orkin or a Rentokil does is not going to be material in the organization, but you can do a few transactions that'll be material on your organization.
Absolutely.
You clearly are, it's a young business here, so you've got to invest in infrastructure that those other firms don't have to do. You've got to worry about growth, organic, and M&A. You've got to work about profitability. But I think on top of that, you're not just an operator, you're forming strategy, right? And so it's really multifaceted what you have to deal with in the role. So when I think about an executive, I tend to break things down into, you've got the strategy aspect, you've got people, you've got the architecture of the business, you have establishing routines, you've got culture. When you start to think back, or at least if you could distill the most 1 or 2 important things that you have to do as an executive, what are they?
Yeah, the strategic planning is certainly, first and foremost of all of it. When we're going into a market, what are we going to do with it? What is that going to look like day 2, day 200, et cetera, and formulating that. And then, the exciting part for me in all of that has been, it's not just one or the other. It's not just about execution and operations. It's about the strategic planning and thinking and molding that market. And what are we going to do there? What's that going to look like? And building that out. And I always use the phrase with our folks of what do we want to be like? What do we want to look like when we grow up? And that's the same thing in each market as we go into it, or as we open a new branch. What is it that we want to accomplish? What does it look like? What's the timeline for that? And how quickly do we want to get that done? We want to do it right. We don't want to rush it, but we don't want to delay it when we can do it faster. So it's making sure that that strategy is all aligned and everybody understands it. And then we're all rowing in the same direction from there. So it's communicating the strategy as well, making sure that everybody understands it. I think in past organizations I've been in, outside of the pest control industry, it's probably one of the biggest differences that I saw from a strategic standpoint. The strategy sat with one or two people in the organization, and not everybody understood what are we trying to accomplish. And, I've always been a big believer that communication trumps all other things. If I don't tell people why we're doing what we're doing, they will make up their own mind why I'm doing it. And human nature is it'll probably be negative. Right. So why not just communicate it well up front and do that? So, and I'm also a big believer that, we have a lot of great people in our organization, and you never know where the next great idea is going to come from. But if they don't know the strategy, how can they contribute to that? And, if I'm the smartest guy in the room, we're in trouble. Right. So let's get all of the other smart people in the room, and let's get ideas from everybody and build that strategy collectively, because people support a world they feel they helped create. Right. And we are collectively so much smarter than we are individually in our organization, for sure. So that's really the link between the two, is making sure that we do what we did last week by getting our whole U.S. leadership team in a room, and let's talk about the strategy for the next 6 and 12 months. And then we all know what we want to look like, and now we're all executing today on what we talked about last week. So,
what does that look like? Earlier, you mentioned this almost Vision 2025 or 5-year plan to that frontline employee that's really thinking about making his next stop or finishing out for the day or making a sales quota for the week. So how do you communicate that strategy down?
It's an excellent question. So everybody needs to understand what their role in the organization contributes as well, and what that means for us, that every customer matters, every service matters, every stop at the end of the day matters as well. And how does that impact the organization, and what do we want to look like? So our goal is that we want to be at $1 billion in revenue by the end of 2025. That's what I'm driving for. It's aggressive. We got a lot of work to do. I think we can do it. I think we got the right people in place. We got the right platform leadership, but it's going to have to be the message all the way down to every technician and every service that we make, that everybody's bought into that, and everybody understands that we're part of something bigger than just that day's services or just that branch or just that platform. We're part of something much bigger. And what is our contribution to Anticimex international and global? And what does that look like as well? Because we've got a responsibility to our teammates there as well.
I mean, it's exciting to know, like, with the end in mind, right? This one more stop is part of the bigger team, right? And if I can hear $1 billion by 2025, I mean, that's impressive.
Absolutely.
You've been in route-based industries a long time. And we were sitting at dinner with Joe Thomas last night. It's just thinking, and he's almost like an encyclopedia, for like a better term. Like, I remember him when he was yay big. And who are people, like, when you think back in the years that you've been here, like, who do you still look up to or think back and, like, really impressed upon you? Just a great way to think about the industry and like help develop you.
Sure. And there's many of them. In my time with Terminix, Albert Cantu, who was the president of Terminix at the time, I still talk to Albert regularly. Has always been one of my mentors, and we've looked at businesses together outside of the industry. So I always look to him as part of that. Norman Goldenberg has always been a good friend and mentor. Steve Good, Fred Strickland, who's now with us here at Anticimex and our Wayne's platform as well. There's always been some leadership within the organization that you could always go and tap into and so on. Wayne Golden, I worked with very closely for many years, learned a ton from Wayne, particularly about how to sell pest control. And then, I had some great branch managers that have worked for me over the years, and great division or regional managers that have worked for me when we opened our commercial division. Frank Neller, Mark Ferrario, still very good friends.
Frank Neller, Aquion, then he?
Yeah, that's where Frank went to. Frank's now in the auto business and doing very well in a CEO role. And Mark Ferrario, who's still in the industry with Western and doing very, very well. Have been good friends and good mentors. And then obviously Michael Vignier, is certainly, I would consider, a mentor at this point. And had a mentor early on in my career that unfortunately passed away early on in my career, but Jim Chewinski, who was a very big part of mentoring me in the industry, particularly from a route-based business standpoint. So, and it's unfortunate I'm missing a ton of names, but I still learn a lot from our folks that we have today. I mean, Jim McHale and I were in the 40 under 40, several years ago with PCT together. And, you can't help but have a conversation with Jim and learn something about the business, right? I mean, it's just...
Or learn something about something.
Phenomenal guy, right? So if everybody, had that drive and that passion for this industry, what would we look like, right?
No, but think about it. Like Jim's on 7 days a week. You can call him, midnight on a Sunday night. We could get him on the box. Yeah, he's always on.
And Bill Talon, who works for us now. Bill came from an outside industry, but in the logistics field, and has brought a ton of knowledge from his background to us as an organization about how to route better and how to be organized and utilize our service people better than we were in the past. So, I'm constantly learning from everybody. There's so many bright people in our business. Some of the nicest people and best friends I've got in my life came from this industry. So, I've tried to steal all of their best ideas throughout my career. So,
how would you describe your leadership style? I mean, you're describing them as mentors, right? You have these direct reports, but at the end of the day, I think you want to really leave an impression upon them. So what's that interaction like?
Yeah, I've always considered myself a strong communicator. Everybody always knows what I expect and the timeline for it and where we want to go. And then it's, get obstacles out of the way, but you got to teach them how to do it as well. Telling them that this is what we want to do and not showing them how to do it is certainly a broken process, if you will. I've also got a Six Sigma background, so I'm very process driven, but it's communicating what's expected and then helping them get there and getting the obstacles out of the way, and then clearly communicating where you stand and what you won't stand for. And it's really nothing more simple than that. And understanding that recognizing talent and developing them and helping them further their career is probably the thing that I enjoy most in my career. And that was kind of the old organization that I worked with. That was our culture at the time, that you and I could run the same business or same size business within the organization. Your numbers could be a little bit better, but if I was developing people that were getting promoted, I'd move up faster. And we're responsible for building our future and our replacements. And that only happens through development of people.
As president now, what area do you hope to improve over the years as you become a better manager and leader?
Yeah, good. So for myself, it's certainly spending more time, with each of them and making sure that we've got the right time at the platform level and that we're strategically maintaining our decentralized model, but not falling back into worlds that I once knew. And we always tend to go back to the old toolbox and what worked, right? And utilize that. But I've learned a lot about our setup here in North America and the way Anticimex has built their organization internationally and so on. And I can certainly do a better job tapping into that experience and coupling that with my past experience and making us a little bit stronger as we go forward. But the old things of doing the right thing by our people and making sure we've got the right people in the right seats doing the right things isn't going to change. That's always going to stay the same.
It's hard, I guess, when you look at the bigger companies over the years, take not just pick on Terminix, but Terminix as an example. And this, you go through, as you get different leaders involved in the organization, somebody wants to have branch super centers, right? The big ones, the $15, $20 million branches. Then somebody else comes in and says, let's break all these up. We need to have small local ones. And then somebody else says, no, we need the big super. And so you get these gyrations. And by the way, we've seen that at all the organizations. But I guess it's hard to, you try to make your mark as an executive, but it's important to not fix what's not broken in the first place. So,
exactly.
Brian, you bring somewhat of a unique perspective to Anticimex. Based on your extensive experience in this industry, and given the fact that you are an entrepreneur yourself, you owned a business, you sold a business, you have done a lot of things. For folks out there who are sitting back thinking about how to grow their own organizations, what sort of advice could you give a $1 or $2 or $3 million operator who wants to be the $5 or $10 million business?
Sure, it's absolutely.
What mistakes have you made?
Absolutely. And it's looking at what other people do and trying to emulate that and looking at the wrong things. Look at what you do well. What's good in your organization. Nothing trumps customer service. Nothing trumps a good customer experience. It's the thing that matters most to our consumers. It's what they expect. You don't need to. I hear a lot of times where they say, well, we don't want to be the next Rollins, or we don't want to be the next Terminex. And I would always laugh and say, why wouldn't you want to be that?
Yeah.
It's kind of silly. But, people have their prejudices against big companies or whatever it may be, that they look at it from that standpoint. But look at the things that those companies do well. Yeah. It's not a mistake that they're the size that they are. It's not a mistake that they've had the success that they've had. And look at, if you're looking to build a $3, $4, or $5 million business with the intention that you may sell it someday, you have to look at who the potential buyers might be and make sure that you're attractive to them. And if you're constantly building, something that's different than what their ability to integrate your business into theirs is going to matter from a valuation standpoint. So I would look at the big players in your area, look at the big players in the industry, and steal all the best ideas you can. They do things very, very well, and they do it for a reason. It works. And it's worked for years. It's worked for decades. In some cases, it's worked for multiple decades. Why would we not want to emulate that?
So, Brian, you mentioned the word customer experience. We hear you say that a lot. What does it mean to you?
It's really clear for me of what that customer experience should look like, but it's never done. It's like painting a bridge. It's, once you finish, you got to start over again. Yep. So when I look at it for where we are today and the Anticimex model of how many different platforms and how many different bolt-on businesses we purchased and integrated into our business, everybody's done certain things a little differently. Some of them really, really well that we could have learned from that and utilize elsewhere and do. So when you look at our industry back 20, 25, 30 years ago, residential pest control was being done monthly in some cases, right? Yeah. So then it shifted to quarterly. In some cases, it's, 3 times a year or even annually, I've seen in some businesses at this point in time. The customer experience or how much they love their technician hasn't changed. The service professional that shows up at the home is still the most important person, and I don't see that changing. But what has changed, because we've changed the frequencies of services, what's the communication look like in between? Is it radio silence? Do they hear anything from us in between? How are we communicating with them? What works for them? Because the way people communicate in their own lives now has changed dramatically. And how are we adapting to that, and how are we changing it? So if you asked me the same question 2 years ago, I'd probably have a little bit of a different answer for you than today, because it's constantly evolving. But it boils down to communicating, making sure the touch points work well, that wherever there is a handoff of a baton, that nobody drops it, and that it works out just as well. And everybody understands that we have multiple opportunities to lose a customer and deliver a bad experience. And it only takes one, as opposed to, when we do a great job with all 14 touch points and it works well, it might not get any attention, but it's the one that we do wrong that gets all the attention. So how do we make sure and minimize those opportunities? And how do we correct them when they do happen? Are
you talking about getting more sophisticated with, like, for example, I might have triennial services and I really don't care at all to talk to my pest control company at all. Patrick, however, he likes to hear from you guys. Absolutely. So you're customizing how I might hear from you versus how Patrick might hear from you.
Exactly. Every customer wants to do, the minimum expectation of you both is we took care of your pests.
Right.
But everybody wants to be treated differently and have a different customer experiences. Why some of these brands that are out there in the market existed to begin with, because everybody wanted something a little different.
Right.
So it's understanding that and catering to that and making sure that we're communicating with you the way you want, Patrick, and Paul, we're communicating with you the way you want, or not, if that's the case. But whatever it is that the customer wants and expects, we deliver on it far beyond what their expectation was. It's not just meeting that, it's exceeding that. That, when you're not doing anything different than some of your major competitors out there, all you have to differentiate yourself is the customer experience. If that's the same as everybody else is doing, or at least perceived that way, then it boils down to who's the low-cost provider.
Price.
None of us want to be that guy.
Yep.
So.
Indeed.
Everyone I've spoken with in North America this year has struggled to keep up with technicians.
Yes.
They're still experiencing growth, maybe not as much as 2020 growth, but they can't hire technicians to keep up with the busy season. I expect it's not any different. I mean, how are y'all making it through this?
Yeah, it's a point that everybody's struggling with. Everybody we talk to as well is dealing with it, and we've dealt with it as well. And it's similar to the conversation we just had about customer experience. It's trying to do the same things we've always done and in a different world than what was the case a year ago and expecting the same things to happen.
Yep.
It's not going to work that way, right? We've got to change as an industry how we market ourselves, how we recruit, how we do, just placing an ad on, a search engine and sitting back and hoping for applications to come in when you need one person or two persons and you only get 4 applicants. Now you're limiting yourself. And, I always half jokingly say, then we hire the least offensive person at that point in time. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So why not be out in front of it and be searching for what are the characteristics of our best service professionals? What are the characteristics of our best branch managers? And I'm not worried about industry experience. We've got enough talent in our organization. We can teach them how to do these jobs. I can't teach heart, desire, work ethic, and intelligence and those things. Let's recruit those folks and let's get aggressively searching out on Indeed and let's go and find their resumes and let's call them and ask them, have you ever considered, making a change in your industry? Because, I hear very often, not only within our organization, but others that, the government subsidies are motivating people to stay home. I don't know that I want those folks working for us anyway. Yeah. If that's what's motivating them, I don't know that they fit our industry. Right. So we want the people that are, customer centric, that believe in that are hardworking and everything that's built this industry to be what it is. Somebody who's staying home for a couple of $100s, I don't know that they fit our mold anyway. Right. We wouldn't want them. So let's go out and let's find the people that meet the characteristics or that fit the mold of what it is that we're looking for. Let's teach them the business and develop them our way.
Kind of going back, I guess this term like legacy sticks in my head, right? You've been, from an entrepreneurial start and again, all the years, and I don't want to put a timeline with you at Anticimex. So I'm just going to throw 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road and you decide to retire and hang up your hat at Anticimex. Yep. Well, what does that look like? How are you measuring yourself? Like what kind of impact do you want to leave as you look back at your time here?
It's a question I have thought of recently. In fact, when Michael and I were traveling a lot, we both had this conversation to get together a lot. And the legacy that he left here and what he accomplished in such a short period of time is remarkable. To come here and we had no business and what he's built prior to leaving. And my job is to now take it to the finish line for him. So, is to get to the finish line. We have our financial goals and targets that we want to get to. And certainly we want to make sure we exceed all of those. But at the end of the day, it's not about being the biggest pest control company in North America. It's about being the perceived best pest control company in North America. And when I say I want an outstanding customer experience delivered that's better than they can get anywhere else, I don't say that lightly. It's not rhetoric. I truly believe that. I think we can change the way our industry is perceived if it all took that approach that let's separate ourselves from the perception that's been created of the industry. As to a large degree, the public still perceives us as the guy working out of his garage with the baseball hat and the silver can, and that's not who we are. There's some of the best professionals you'll meet in any industry work in this industry, and we need to do a better job marketing that. So twofold approach to it that I want to see a better perception of our industry, more professional perception of our industry from the general public before I hang them up. Yeah. And I want to make sure that what we leave here is the best customer experience and best company that we can deliver on.
Brian, it's been super exciting to sit down with you today to talk a little bit about Anticimex North America. Is there anything, anything you want to leave us with or talk to our listeners about with regard to you or Anticimex?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been great. As I've said, throughout this conversation, that our goal to build what we're building here in North America is exciting. I'm excited about the opportunity. As I said, Michael Vignier, my predecessor, did a phenomenal job at getting the ball rolling and getting us to this point, and excited about getting it to the finish line. And that's going to be strong organic growth, and it's going to be a very aggressive strategic M&A strategy that's as strategic as it is opportunistic, but it's going to be a little bit of both. So the type of businesses that we're looking for out there are those that had that strong entrepreneurial spirit, that believed in a great customer experience, that if they're looking for what their next level of career is going to look like and they want to join us, we'd love to talk to them. If they're interested in discussing career paths for their employees and what that's going to look like, we're only as good as the businesses that we bring on board with us, the people that come along with it.
Yeah.
And some of the best talent that we've got working in our organization came from within. I came from within an acquisition into the business. So it's not something that we take lightly.
Effectively, everyone in your organization came from an acquisition, literally.
Literally. I mean, it's not just rhetoric for us. It's literally that's the way it occurred. So understanding that side, both sides of the table, and what that looks like, and the angst that comes along with it, and making that process as simple as possible for the seller. Understanding that it's probably the only time, or one of the only times, they'll sell a business in their lifetime. Mm-hmm. So making sure that they understand that we take that very seriously, and how we're going to manage that business going forward. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, if they're interested in staying on board with us, that we create that opportunity for them. But we're looking at new market expansion, as well as all of the markets that we're currently within, of continuing to grow within them. So we're very interested in speaking to all of them.
Fantastic.
Brian, congratulations. Look forward to what you're going to do with Anticimex North America, leading them. You have great people. Just congratulations, and best of luck to you.
I appreciate it.
Super excited to see what you're going to do, man. Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Hang on.
Hang on.
Hang on.
We felt like it was smart for us to go with somebody that knows the industry and has the connections. I could try and call the strategics and leave voicemails with people and, hey, I'm Matt Brill from Mr. Mister. But when Paul reaches out, he gets calls. We talked to Paul first in 2019. There hadn't been a transaction of a pure play mosquito business. And so he was excited by that because, he just pest control all the time. So this was something new for him. We felt very confident in his past successes, and just personality wise had a really good feel for him. He's fun. He's not, definitely not a boring guy. We learned that, as far as Paul was aware of, that we were the largest of the independent mosquito control companies, which shocked us. We had no idea. Selling the business, we knew, was it going to be a goal? We didn't know when. Our questions were around the economy. There has to be a recession. We didn't, global pandemic was not on the bingo card. But during a recession, what would happen to our business? Because we didn't know, because our growth had taken place since 2013, where we've been in this booming economy. So what happens if the economy drops out? The other piece is the stuff that kept me up at night is the fact that we had 35 trucks on the road, and the risk of that, and that scares me. Every accident that we had, I was terrified. Started looking around to see who could we talk to find out what the business is worth and what does an exit look like. So in having the conversations with Paul, his confidence, his ability to get a deal done is ultimately what it is that makes you choose somebody. And that's why we chose Paul, is we were infinitely confident even after, we'd have a conversation with the acquirer and we'd be like, oh God, that didn't sound good. And Paul would be like, I got it, I'll fix it. And he does. And he always made it work. Paul's fun to talk to, right? He's a funny guy. He is clearly extremely knowledgeable about the industry. We became friends very quickly. I don't know that always happens. I think, people appreciate their banker if, they get a deal done, right? Ultimately, that's if Paul and I became best friends and he couldn't get a deal done, that I'd have a new friend, but then a new banker too. He was able to do both, and my partner felt the same way. We really like him. We'd call each other and talk about not the deal, right? Family, the kids. I still do the same after the deal. We talk and just shoot the breeze. He's a good guy and become a good friend.
there may be occasions where a bolt-on acquisition may have a stronger brand in the market than the platform level, and we'd take a look at it. That does it make sense to change the brand? Does it make sense to absorb it? Does it make sense to run the two brands for a period of time and then have a strategy relative to timeline where we're going to absorb it and integrate it in?
Do we need to restate that?
No.
You're saying it didn't get in the frame.
It did not.
Okay.
Did you see it?
What?
Did you see him walking?
Yeah, I saw. Just like, what the heck is he doing? Like,
Well, the wide probably, but we can cut to the tight. We're in the background. Like, watch that second angle right now. You see him
Yeah.
on the tight shot?
The tight one, no.
Okay, so we're safe. Max.
yeah, I mean,
I just saw him.
it's like really.
Will someone touch base with him? Just ask
Yeah,
him.
somebody might want to have a little chat with him.
Somebody might want to have a little chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you hiring?
No.